My name's John Tomalin, and we moved to Boxmoor in 1931, I think it was. And I grew up in Boxmoor, went to the local infant school, onto the junior school. We didn't have 11 pluses then, but I finished up at the Crabtree Lane School, which was the secondary modern school, and went through there. Didn't get any further, wasn't particularly bright, and but I did get very interested in radio and television. This started out because during the war my brother and I, evidently it was difficult to get us to bed, and we were quite young, as I say. I was only coming up to 6 when the war started and 12 when it finished. And one of my father's colleagues, Frank Drew, who he worked with in the pocket engineering department, suggested that Dad should build us a crystal set, which is one of the first radio sets ever invented, which has got 3 parts to it, and you can plug a pair of earphones in and have a large aerial, and you could listen basically to what was then the Home Service and the La Forces programme, except they both came in together, so you had to learn to concentrate on one programme, but it got us to bed. But it got me very, very interested in radio, and eventually when I was at the senior school, I built myself a little 3-valve radio with batteries and things, and the science master there was so interested in it, he borrowed it and it went off to an exhibition in London and all that sort of thing. But when it came to leaving school, there wasn't a great deal of opportunities then in electronics around here. And my father wanted me to join him and do what he did, which would have an apprenticeship in the engineering department at Dickinson's. And I came for an interview, right, and was offered the job. Unfortunately, his colleague, Frank Drew, had a son who went to the same school and we knew each other. But he had lost an eye due to the fact that a friend had fired an arrow into there in the old days when boys were always firing bows and arrows and making them and carrying knives to cut the chops down. We all carried sheath knives then because Boy Scouts did. And can't remember anybody stabbing anybody else, but you know, knives were used to play with then, not to do anything else. Anyway, unfortunately, the company decided not to employ Frank Drew's son because they didn't want somebody with an eye when in an engineering department when bits of metal could be flying around and he could lose the other eye. And his father complained that they'd got me, and well, to cut a long story short, the company decided I couldn't have an engineering apprenticeship, but I could have a job working in an office, which bored me to stiff. I was given the job which nobody else probably wanted to do, of filing, and you can imagine the complicated names of companies that all this correspondence was coming from. And you know, I just filed them under the name of what I thought, probably the first name, if it was a John Bloggs. I probably filed it under John. Anyway, when I left, which was after 8 weeks, not at their request, I hadn't got quite that far, but I left them because I found, my father and I found a job for me in one of the local shops playing radio sets. But I imagine it took several months for them to sort out their filing. But anyway, Yes, while I was here, I managed to find my way upstairs to the pocket engineering department and speak to my dad and everything else, and it was interesting. But anyway, that's another story. Anyway, I then started working for a little radio shop along the road here. That was E. Winters, and I was there for 2 years. I had one engineer who was a very good engineer for his day, repairing radios, and it was mainly radios then, because there was no television during the war, and very few people could afford them immediately afterwards. Well, obviously from the time I could remember, he was cycling off to work, but of course that was by the time we were in Boxmoor. He had been apprenticed to a firm called Hayward Tylers in Luton, and he obviously finished his apprenticeship, but I'm not quite sure what happened between. It was the Great Depression, and I've got a feeling that they couldn't keep him on once he'd finished his apprenticeship. And a relation who lived in Boxmoor mentioned that Dickinson's were looking for engineers, and he was out of work and trying to save up to get married, obviously, and he cycled all the way over here on the off chance, popped into the personnel department, or was directed there, and he was offered a job immediately. So he cycled all the way back and started work the following Monday, and he cycled around backwards and forwards whenever the weather was suitable. I mean, there were odd days then when we had great snow drifts, wasn't there, way back at that time, and he just had to come on a bus. So goodness knows what time he had to get up. And he did that right the way through, and got married in 1931, and still lived in Luton. They bought a house in Luton, and he did that for another 4 years before he twisted Mum's arm, and they moved out and bought a house in Boxmoor. But he still kept cycling, and did so right the way through, and he enjoyed working at Dickinson's, I think. But of course war came along, and he suddenly disappeared from home for a month, and all I heard was that he was having to go on a course in Oxford. I don't know where in Oxford, but I imagine it was one of the big engineering firms, Morris Motors or something like that, who were already making munitions, and he was empty taught to make percussion caps for explosive 20mm cannon shells, so the size that was used, Spitfires and no end. And so he spent the rest of the war making these things, presumably in the main engineering department here, and then went back, obviously, back to the pocket engineering department, where the machines there, I think, were pretty ancient at the time, and the engineering department had to make the spares because they weren't obtainable. So they were fairly busy, but there was obviously lots of spare time as well, because lots of things got manufactured for homes and anything like that. And even the plumbing department, I know, was pressed into action for doing a few home jobs because it could be done. Although in the war every shell counted, he did bring one of these percussion heads home, which was all made of brass and consisted of 4 pieces, so that when the shell hit, it pushed in, and I don't know how the explosives work, but it ignited the explosives, and once the shell hit another aircraft, then it would explode, and that would be it. So it was an invaluable part of what went on. But as I say, he brought one of those home, Obviously shouldn't have come home, but it did. And I had it as a souvenir for a long, long while, but then I seem to remember I swapped it for something else at school with another boy. And I remember my father, when he found out, wasn't over pleased, but that's what happened. Yeah. And yeah, so it no longer is in the family, unfortunately. I really regret doing that myself. But yes, and I say other things happen there. I've still got an ashtray made of aluminium with a gull that wobbled around. That was all made in Dickinson's engineering department, and from what I gather, lots of other things happened. I think they got the machines all sort of sorted out, probably remade them, and there wasn't the work that there used to be, but they found how to fill their time. So they were working nights as well. I think my father had a week on, week off or something like that. And he was also the first aider, appointed first aider and warden for going around, obviously, and then he was issued with this in case all the lights went out one day. I don't think the mills ever got bombed, did they? And we had a couple of odd bombs in Hempstead, but it was never needed. But that's his souvenir he kept. And it's a very good torch, as you can see. I mean, it was so well made. At the moment, if I press the switch, it doesn't work. You have to unscrew this or screw it right. And then it works. And yeah, it's got the name of the manufacturer on the bottom, which was the firm that made the old miners' lamps. So they were obviously pressed in the war to make those. And yeah, that's basically it.